Welcome back to part 3 of my walkthrough of a Strong's definition. If you missed part 1 and 2, they're linked to this video and it would probably help if you watch them first because this will all make way more sense in context. I'm continuing with the word unbelief from the past 2 weeks because in our last entry from G1 for the Greek word / letter alpha, we learned that alpha is a prefix and that the Strong's G1 is teaching 2 important Greek prefixes, alpha privative meaning not or without and alpha of union. It's rare, but it comes from the idea of together. So back to G571, we go back to the beginning part where it tells us that this word comes from G1 as a negative particle. We know that the A at the beginning of the word apistos is the same as the prefix un in the English language in words like unbelief. So the other entry in this word was G4103. Again, we see the same parts as before. We're familiar with these now. We have the Strong's number, or its address in the book. We have the words written in Greek, and then the number of times it occurs in the New Testament. Next, the transliteration of the word, or the word spelled with English letters, and finally the pronunciation. But again, we see that we have not reached the root of these words that we have been studying, but we will, and it will all come together in the end. But by now, you're probably seeing why looking up a word in Strong's isn't quite the same as using a standard dictionary. We'll continue with this entry and ignore the other Strong's reference for now, but we will take note of the fact that this entry is for the word that means to persuade, convince, or trust. So the idea behind pistos, our Greek word, comes from trusting or being persuaded. Think of it as someone who trusts or someone who can be trusted. So now in our entry, we see the abbreviation for objective and subjective. So this is where it can sometimes be confusing because the entry simply says objectively trustworthy, subjectively trustful. So the simplest way to remember this is to remember subjective means the person is trusting and objective means the person is trustworthy. Now in this next line, we see many translation statistics. We see faithful 53 times, believe 6 times, believe in 2 times, true 2 times, faithfully 1 time, believer 1 time, sure 1 time, and not translated 1 time. This is telling us how translators rendered the word, and we see the most common translation for this word is faithful rather than believing. So this tells you something about how this word is usually functioning. So now we see that this word functions in its 2 different senses, active and passive. In its active sense, it describes someone who's exercising faith, so they're believing or trusting, and it gives us 3 scripture references so that we can see it used this way. Next, we see the passive sense describes someone who receives trust from others because they're reliable, and we're given 2 scripture references that show that sense. This would be the sense of a dependable person. This is one of the most important parts of this. Imagine the word trusted. It can either mean, in the active sense, someone who trusts, he trusted her, or in the passive sense, someone who is trusted, he was her trusted partner. Notice how the context determines the meaning that's intended. The Greek word pistos works the same way. And finally, these last translations offer scriptures where the word is translated differently, and you can look each of them up to see how it's used and gain a sense for why it was rendered that way. Next week, we'll look at the root of the word, and then we will sum it all up and bring them all together and see what it is that we've learned from going into the Strong's.